Hey everybody, welcome to my process video for painting Marvel's Domino. So right off the bat, I'm working in Photoshop Creative Cloud. I have my sketch on the top layer set to multiply, and I'm working on a layer beneath that to add in the colors. Right now I'm using the pen tool to go ahead and cut out all the shapes I'm going to use for her outfit, which I have set to like an 85% black. And you could also use the lasso tool if you wanted to, or just paint it in straight on with a brush, whatever tools you're comfortable with. Next, I'm roughing in her hair and then doing her skin tone on a separate layer underneath her outfit. And I'm using a beige white as opposed to a straight white, which you normally would see in the comics. Here I'm taking some basic shapes using the rectangle tool and using that to build the shape of the gun. And then I'm just carving out some extra shapes on it. The gun's not really based on any real gun in particular. I just kind of made it up as I went along. Now I'm painting in her trigger finger, the trigger behind it, adding a little bit more bulk to the gun. Now I'm bringing in my original sketch for this, which is a joint project I'm doing with another artist, and I'm just bringing this in so I have reference for where I want the shadows and the highlights to be. This way when he does his part, he can match the same lighting. Adding some highlights right now to her bodysuit, kind of jumping around a little bit, just using a soft round brush. And I'm starting to paint in the shadows, but then I decided to go with the lasso tool to do it so I can draw the shapes I want and then use the radial gradient tool set to black, and then I can pull a gradient from foreground color to transparent to help make those shadows. By doing that, the transparent area tends to fall off and then blend into the background color I have set. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the smudge tool and going and smudging all the hard edges from those shapes that I cut with the lasso tool and blending them into the background of the bodysuit. This gives it a little bit more painterly texture to it. And I'm going to do the same thing on the face using the lasso tool to add some shadow areas, which I'll then go in and smudge in. I'm just adding the spot for her eye and cutting out the eye shapes. And what I'm doing here is taking the pencil lines that exist and I merged it with the colors and I'm blending them in using the smudge tool. I wanted to avoid having a hard outline like you would see in a comic book, so I wanted to blur the lines and at least give me a guide to where the shapes are, but then it will blend into the background of the painting. I'm just going through smudging some more lines, blending everything in to smooth it out. I'm just going through with some paint and painting out some of the extraneous lines, doing a little bit of cleanup on this. There's a lot of pencil lines from this sketch that I want to get out of here. So I'm just going to paint them out, erase some of the ones around the perimeter. I'm using a soft brush here to make some highlights in her hair. And then I'm taking a smaller version of that brush with a darker color and going underneath them to create the shadows so the strands of hair have volume to them. Again, getting some of the extraneous pencil lines out. And adding more highlights on the part of her hair and where the hair tends to round out and catches the light. Getting some facial details, eyebrows, eyelashes, irises to her eyes. I want to paint in her lips. Her lips and some of the red that's in her eye are really the only warm colors in this whole composition. Everything else will look very cool and bluish by the time this is done. So using the red lips kind of draws your attention right to her face. Now I'm adding some modeling on her face, the highlights on her nose and nostrils and her cheek, in the chin area, also on her chest, and a little bit on her hips where they show through on her bodysuit. I'm adding some vibrant white highlights to her bodysuit, which I then blend into the background a little bit. Now I'm using the background removal tool, which will get rid of the crinkly paper texture. Since I drew this on a tracing paper, the background had a little bit of texture to it, so we want to get rid of that. I'm just doing the detailing on her straps. Basically, I'm just using a light gray for the buckles and a slightly darker, like a charcoal black, charcoal gray for the straps. And I'm just painting them with just a standard hard brush. Adding some details to her belt. Again, just using a hard brush. And there's some extra pencil lines in there I wanted to paint out. Now what I'm doing here is I have a blue line of this sketch that I had modified before I did this painting, so I want to match my painting up to the position I had the sketch in. So I flattened her foot a little bit and then rotated it so it makes better connection with the ground. And then I tilted her wrist up a little bit. In order to do that, I had to cut it and separate it and then elongate it a little bit and make it match, and then just blend that back in. That's the beauty of Photoshop. Anything you cut and stitch back together, you could easily blend and no one knows the difference. So I'm going through and adding highlights on the buckles and towards the outer side of her bodysuit. Putting a lot of reflected light in her bodysuit. Here I was painting in the zipper, but I didn't have a really good solution for doing that, so I just painted it back out. Instead, put a little rim highlight to make it look like there's a little thickness to her suit. A couple highlights in the ab area. And again, I'm using pretty much the same brush for this whole thing. It's just either a hard round or a soft round brush. And I'm just varying the opacity depending on what I'm doing. For usually with these highlights, it's probably set to about 70%. The softer glows probably around 30%. And there are other ways of doing that, but I find to just vary the opacity makes it a hell of a lot easier to get the effect you want. Put a little rim highlights on her belt and some texture in the belt. Adding some shadows to the chest area. Now the boots, for some reason, look way more detailed than they actually are. To achieve this, I basically put a shadow underneath on the bottom of the straps, and then a highlight on the top of the straps, and then I added in this little silver belt buckle highlights, and some highlights for some of the ornamentation on the boots. It gives it the effect that it's more detailed than it actually is, which looks kind of cool. I'm just going through and adding some hard highlights, give the effect that her suit's made of either latex or hard leather. You can see here again I'm adding in the silver for the buckles, and then doing the straps and adding a shadow to give it some dimension. And adding some little white highlights. Now for the gun, I went and blurred in all the pencil lines to create some shadow areas, and then I'll go over with the line tool with 100% black and fill those in, and then blur them a little bit, just to give the gun a couple of hard edges in there, so the shadows don't look so blendy. And you're putting some gunmetal highlights on here. Basically, just using a brush set to screen with a lighter gray. Go over it a couple of times and keep lightening it. And they're making a little chamber for the expelled bullets to or cartridges to come out of the gun, giving a rim light and a little bit of a shadow. Here we're just adding some more shadow and highlight details, and I'm kind of bouncing around in different places, which is kind of typical. Anytime I paint something, I bounce from one place to another. I don't really have a particular method of doing it. I guess it's whatever strikes me at the time. I jump around and start detailing. You'll notice that this gun is not the same as the other gun. When I sketched this, I really didn't think about how I wanted the guns to look. I just kind of roughed in the basic shapes. So I'm doing a lot of modeling of the gun here, just kind of cutting shapes out and defining what the front of it looks like. And the chamber on this is elongated. It's not just round like the other gun would be. So maybe this gun shoots a different type of projectile. I don't know what the story is behind that. Maybe she was in a fight and lost her weapon and picked up two random weapons and they were both different. Tells a little bit of a story. Adding some final highlights to her hair, on the gun, on her face. And now I put another layer with a red background, so this helps me see what parts I still have to erase out. And now I got rid of the red, we put a blue background. I'm going to add a blue rim light to her. And I'm going to go through, lighten the background, and with a darker and a lighter brush, make some circular elements. I'm going to blur to make a gradient background. Now I was trying to mimic, at least in my head, the idea of like a James Bond type poster where he's standing on that slick surface and it kind of has that circular element behind him. But I wasn't feeling it, so I decided to get rid of the circle, but I wanted to keep the glossy background and a floor element that looked kind of like glass. So that's why I flipped her around and made a reflection with her boots, and then decided to use her name as part of the background and then a larger version of it behind her with the same reflection. So this is pretty much it. This is kind of how I did it. So I hope you guys like this, and I hope you learned something. If you'd like, leave me a comment, let me know. Thanks.